to the College Football Power Hour. That's Jason Fitz. I'm Caroline Fenton. No Adam Brenneman tonight because apparently watching Central Michigan Toledo was more important for Adam. I don't even know where he is tonight. He just didn't show up. He didn't want to hang out with us tonight, Fitz.
Well, you know what? He's probably outside the door of the College Football Playoff Committee, slamming his fist against it, saying, "What are you doing? And why are you making me so mad?" At least on behalf of the show, that's what I hope Brenneman is doing. I hope that he has taken a family medical leave day so that he can go down and he can make sure that his voice is heard because somebody needs to get our voice in this College Football Playoff Committee.
But Penn State's at 4. So I don't know.
Never mind.
So maybe Adam Brenneman is on his way to Grapevine, Texas to bring, edible arrangements and fruit baskets, maybe perhaps some muffins, blueberry, lemon poppy seed, all of the above, just as a thank you and a token of appreciation for the venerable College Football Playoff Committee.
My want for a muffin now is higher than it has ever been. Like right? You mentioned the blueberry, I'm not usually a blueberry muffin guy, but the little candied sugar thing on top of the blue. Oh man, that's all I'm going to be thinking about this whole show.
I made yesterday, was feeling funky and fresh, made coffee cake muffins.
Wait, from
scratch? I'll send some up to Connecticut. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Come on, bring them. Bring them.
Yeah, I'll personal break the Betty diet. Crocker.
Yeah.
Right
I will break the diet for personal Betty Crocker. Let's go.
There's going to be a lot of people breaking their diets over stress eating or emotional eating based off of the college football playoff rankings that we saw tonight. Fitz, I understand that this is very much so a week-to-week league. Every week, the conversations that we have about some teams at the top of the college football rankings, even at the bottom of the college football rankings, our conversations about these teams change drastically because it's really hard to predict what 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids do. There's more parity, it feels like, in the sport this season than there has been in recent history. But what I didn't expect is for the college football playoff rankings to be as fickle as we feel as college football fans. So we just got the college football playoff rankings. We are fresh off of the ESPN show that is pretty confusing to follow when you've got the rankings and the seedings. But now that we have the second edition of the college football playoff rankings, your initial takeaway.
I love this sport. You love this sport. It's an honor to get to talk about this sport. And we love this sport as fans and as media. I say that because I love this sport and I love playoff expansion. And I sit here right now after 2 weeks with this committee, and it is so clear that the playoff system is already broken. And that breaks my heart because we fought to get to 12. And I sat there at the time and I said, man, this is going to get confusing if we don't just let the top 12 in. I know that football will take care of itself. That's what everybody relies on. But what if it doesn't? And if the college football playoff started today, the number 12 team, according to the playoff committee, is Georgia. And they would miss out on the playoffs because we have automatic bids given to the group of 4 champions and the highest ranked champion that is part of the rest of college football. So even though Boise State, according to the college football playoff committee, is not a top 12 team, they become a bid thief and they take that away from Georgia. So automatically, we have to say, after only 2 weeks of listening to the committee, that there's a very real chance that the number 12 team, according to the committee, will actually sit back and watch the college football playoff happen. Didn't we just see controversy with the team left out that proved they belong with Florida State? And now we're seeing it the first year of this. It's a broken system that we couldn't even make it 1 year before it becomes so very clear what the flaw in the system is.
I think it's fair to say, no matter what the system is, it's going to be flawed and it's going to feel broken. Because how many times have you heard or seen college football fans banging on the table to bring back the BCS? I hear it all the time. Well, when we were living in a BCS era, it was, this isn't fair. Computers shouldn't be coming up with results. You need the results on the field. Expand the field. So then we had the college football playoff. But then when we were in a 4-team college football playoff, there was always going to be 1 or even 2 teams on the outside looking in, most notably last season with Florida State undefeated and a 1-loss Alabama team got in over an undefeated Florida State team. And that didn't feel fair. And then there were some years with the 4-team playoff where maybe didn't need 4 teams. You probably just needed 2. Like, it was pretty clear what the 2 best teams in the country were. Okay, so there are some teams on the outside looking into the 4-team playoff. Let's expand the playoff. We'll make it 12 teams. And to make it fair and to maintain relevancy and importance of of conference championship games, well, then those teams will get an automatic bye. Okay, so everything's fair and everything's even. You get incentivized for winning your conference, and now the group of 5 gets a seat at the table, and we're expanding the field, and it still doesn't feel fair. And look, I don't want to live in a world where a 2-loss, where it sits right now, could change after this weekend, a 2-loss Georgia team with the most difficult strength of schedule is sitting at home and not in the playoff because Boise State bumped them out of it. But I also have to say, hey, Georgia, you think you're deserving of a playoff spot? Win your games.
Yeah, but see, here's the problem with that. It's not that I agree with you. Win your games, fine. The 2 losses that Georgia has, all right, has Boise State played any team so far this year that is anywhere near as difficult as the 2 losses that Georgia has? Like
no, and that's the flaw. That's the total flaw.
It's like, congratulations, Boise State. All right, but okay, let's look at Indiana. We've talked ad nauseum about them. They now have the 100th ranked strength of schedule. Army has the 103rd ranked, 133rd ranked schedule. Like, my question is, why schedule anybody? My God, like, at this point, just stay away from doing any schedule. The worst teams in your conference you possibly can every year. Make sure you just backload it with whatever is the bare minimum. Put the bare minimum flair out there, schedule nobody, and go undefeated. Because if that's all we care about, if that's the reason to put Boise State in over Georgia, like, at some point, if we're going to still have a committee, then let them pick the 12 best teams, whoever they are. I don't care if all 12 come from the SEC. I don't care if all 12 come from the Big Ten. Like, if you're going to do the 12 best, then let it be the 12 best. To have some, we didn't even make it 2 weeks. We didn't even make it 2 weeks with the 12 best.
We didn't even make it 1 week with the 12 best.
What are we doing?
And then that opens up the conversation of how do you decide who is the best team? You can't just go strictly off of record, because if you asked me, who are the 12 best teams in college football, Georgia would be one of them, but they have 2 losses. Okay, well, does that mean that an undefeated Indiana would beat Georgia on a neutral field today because Indiana is undefeated and Georgia has 2 losses? Of course not. That's not what that means. So how can you at least appear on the outside looking in like you are being fair? How do you at least give these teams that frankly don't play in as competitive conferences as maybe the Big Ten or the SEC, but you beat everybody on your schedule? I understand that Indiana has what, the 100th ranked strength of schedule? Not great. Am I supposed to, not acknowledge what Indiana is doing just because they haven't played anybody?
No, but that's what the committee is. See, I agree with you. It's not fair. I don't want it to be fair. I want it to be right. And the committee is doing exactly what we're asking them to do. They are telling us specifically who the 12 best teams are. It's the system that's getting in the way of that. Like, the committee's charged to give us the 25 best teams in college football. Now, we may not agree with the committee, but they come up with these rankings. My problem is that they're coming up with these rankings in a vacuum, and then the gods of college football, also known as the commissioners of all of the major conferences who want to make sure their conferences get paid, came in and said, look, great, thank you so much for giving us these rankings. We're now going to take them and we're going to use them like toilet paper because we need to make sure that 5 teams automatically get in. Like, okay. Even if you want to take the 12 best and then reseed them based on something in the conference, I don't love that, but if that's what you're going to do, fine. But if you're going to force feed a team, and this is best case scenario, like Boise State is at least in the conversation. They're 13th ranked. There's going to be a year where nobody from the AAC and nobody from the Mountain West and nobody looks like they're deserving, right? There's going to be a year where it's just obviously a bad football team that doesn't have Ashton Genty saving them, right? That team is still just going to be shoved down our throats because they have to make the college football playoff. Or if we've got a year where, my God, if somebody comes in and they've lost 3 or 4 games and they miraculously win their conference championship game, I don't want the basketball system. There are 64 teams in the basketball. There's enough that you can work most of that out in the basketball. This is only 12 teams. So you're saying, and I get it, that, hey, I want to make sure that everybody has equal chance to be judged. The committee is judging. We're just taking the committee and then we're saying, thank you so much for days of debate. We're now going to put these rules in place that are completely arbitrary that make your rankings trash.
It's fair. because it's almost like what's the point of the rankings? And there's very fair arguments being made of these rankings don't really matter, because even though Miami is ranked today on Tuesday, November 12th as the number 9 team in the country, well, if the playoff was tomorrow, Miami would be the 4 seed. Getting a first round bye. How do you get to just jump 5 spots just because you play in the ACC and you are now the number 1 team in the ACC? It doesn't feel right. But neither does not incentivizing a conference champion. I like conference championship games. I think conference championship games should mean something. There's a very fair argument to be made that conference championship games should just go away. Like, they should go away and they make things more complicated than they need to be. That's not going to happen, though, Fitz. You and I both know that's not going to happen.
No, you're right. But the funny thing is Miami. This thing with Miami is so out of whack. You're right that Miami being the 4 seed makes no sense. I'm so weirded out by the fact that we're cramming Miami into the 4 seed that we're not even talking about the fact that Miami went out and finally did what they've done all year. They played, Russian roulette. This time they lost, and they're still ranked that high. I was kind of surprised that the committee's really going to try and tell me right now, as broken as we all agree Georgia is. And I will say loudly, if you haven't watched our show before, if this is the only clip you see on social media and you think that I'm suddenly a Georgia homer, we have been. This show has been tough on Georgia every single week. I predicted that they would lose last week.
So.
There's nothing that happened that shocked me. Georgia's still better than Miami. I don't give a damn what you say. So, Georgia is better than Miami. So, all of a sudden, we're going to take a Miami team that has tried to lose every single week, finally had to bite him in the butt against Georgia Tech. Let's calm down. And all of a sudden, you're going to try and still tell me that they're a top 12 team? Come on.
And it looks like more of these 12 teams that are now seeded to be the top 12 teams, most of them than not are going to have bad losses on their schedule. Because Miami looks like right now, if they win out, that they will get to the college football playoff. They will have a loss to Georgia Tech on their schedule. Tennessee, if they can beat Georgia this weekend, even if they don't beat Georgia this weekend, I still think there's a very strong case for Tennessee to get in. We can get into that. But Tennessee is going to have a loss to Arkansas on their schedule. There's going to be a lot of... Ole Miss is going to have a loss to Kentucky on their schedule. Alabama is going to have a loss to Vanderbilt on their schedule. A loss that looks much more favorable now than it did at the time. But Vanderbilt is still an unranked football team. So that's 4 or 5 teams that I just named that have unranked losses.
That might be the new college football, though, Caroline. You're right. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that till you just said it. But there is this element of in a 12-team playoff, do we need to calm down a little bit on overreacting to bad losses if everybody's going to take one, right? Everybody just feels like they have a aw shucks on their resume. We've talked about before, whatever the 10 commandments were of the college football playoff, don't have thou shalt not get blown out, thou shalt not lose 2 games. All of these things have been thrown away now. And maybe bad losses are one of the things that you throw away, because it's just, everybody's going to have a bad Saturday. And if everybody's going to have a bad Saturday, are we going to look at bad Saturdays different? I think that's an interesting concept of the future of college football.
But the teams that don't have those bad losses are getting incentivized for it. Because Ohio State is a 1-loss team above a handful of undefeated teams, but Ohio State's 1 loss is to the number 1 team in the country. Yeah, so Ohio State gets the benefit of the doubt for that. Penn State at 4, their 1 loss is number 2 Ohio State. Texas at 3, their 1 loss was... what was Georgia at the time, 2 or 3, and now number 12 Georgia. That's a favorable loss for Texas versus the back half of the top 12, whether it's Miami or Alabama or Ole Miss. Those teams will play, if the college football playoff happened tomorrow, those teams will play on the road and they get docked for having some of those bad losses. But since we talk about some of the seeding, permission to be an SEC homer for just a second.
Go on.
Since Adam Brenneman is not with us and I don't have him to yell at me for it. Looking at the bottom of the top 25, and I understand that might sound kind of irrelevant right now because the bottom of the top 25, none of those teams feel like they have a path to the college football playoff, or at least a clear and probable path, but humor me for a second. Why are Clemson and Louisville ranked above South Carolina and LSU? Where is Clemson's signature win? Because South Carolina has one against Texas A&M, a team that the committee values at 15. LSU has one over Ole Miss, a team that the committee values at number 11. Louisville's signature win is Clemson. Clemson doesn't have a signature win. Now, to be totally fair, both Louisville and Clemson's losses are quote-unquote quality losses. Clemson lost to Georgia at the beginning of the year, and then to Louisville, who the College Football Playoff Committee has ranked, and Louisville lost to Notre Dame, and who else have they lost to on their schedule? SMU and Miami, all ranked teams, to be
very
totally fair.
important SMU team, yes.
A key SMU team in this ACC race. But as we talk about quality losses, it almost feels like, and we touched on this last week, and it just is emphasized this week, now the second week in a row, that the quality wins don't feel as important as the quality of losses. That Clemson and Louisville get the benefit of the doubt of those quality losses. And if we want to look at the top of the top 12 Fitz, Penn State is ranked number 4, would be seeded 6th, but is ranked number 4 by the committee. Tennessee is at 7. The only glaring difference that I see between those two teams is Tennessee has a bad loss to an unranked Arkansas team. Penn State has a good loss. But Tennessee also has a damn good win over Alabama. Penn State doesn't have that win that jumps off the page of that's your resume building kind of win.
Isn't that
so? To be an SEC homer here, I kind of feel like some of those teams deserve more benefit of the doubt than maybe they're getting.
This is the danger that you and I joked before we even started the college football playoff rankings. The quality loss, quality loss, just it kind of makes me want to throw up in my mouth a little bit. And it feels like every year the committee just bends over backwards to tell you how great a loss is without acknowledging how great some wins are. And there is a moment for me where, I think it's very fair to turn around and talk about some of the unforced errors that Tennessee has had and some of the weeks that Tennessee hasn't looked necessarily like world beaters. And Penn State, certainly to your point, does have a better win, but or better loss, I should say. The hard part of this is Penn State hasn't been asked to do the same things that Tennessee has been asked to do week in and week out. We can say this because Adam's not here, but if we're being fair,
sorry, Adam.
There are levels of even Adam admitted after Penn State lost to Ohio State that sure, they can score a bunch of points on bad football teams. That's not what everybody's looking for, right? I think you're right. The reason I don't freak out too much for the SEC is a lot of this is going to take care of itself. Tennessee's going to control its own destiny. Texas A&M is going to control its own destiny. So there are still opportunities to grow and get into this thing. But I do think, I'm surprised that we saw such a dip, for example, from Georgia. I think, Caroline, this also speaks to the fact that the committee is wildly week to week. Georgia, yes, Georgia got beat. That's fine. They went all the way from number 2 to number 12, number 13 but number 12. I was a little surprised. I thought they would fall, but that's a free fall in these rankings. LSU was a free fall in these rankings, and that's a huge reaction from a committee that usually doesn't have massive jumps week to week. So I do think it's interesting that the committee seems to be looking for reasons to just swipe people down, and we'll see what happens. We have a big Tennessee Georgia game this weekend. Is the loser just going to be just catapulted down the rankings? Because that's one thing we saw today. If Indiana, Ohio State, the loser of that game, are they just going to get absolutely drubbed in the rankings? Because this could be a trend of this committee that would make me really scared to watch my favorite team take on anybody that's tough over the next few weeks.
And I think that's where process comes in. If Alabama and LSU was a super tightly contested game and Alabama won it off a walk-off field goal, would LSU drop all the way to 22? Maybe. Maybe they would have. But they didn't. They got absolutely blown out. And I think the College Football Playoff Committee reserves the right to say, this team is not the team that we thought they were. Same thing with Ole Miss and Georgia. If that was a super close game and, Ole Miss had the home field advantage and Ole Miss just barely squeaked past Georgia, maybe it was off of a funky call. I don't think that Georgia would have dropped all the way down to 12, but the final score, I don't think is indicative of how that game went. Georgia got their butts kicked on both sides of the ball. Ole Miss was the better team for majority of 4 quarters. So I think that's where the process comes into play. And I think that's important for teams like Indiana that don't have the strongest schedule to support their resume. If they get blown out by Ohio State in a couple of weeks, maybe the committee views that differently than a very close game against Ohio State.
Fair, but the math ain't mathing on one thing. The one portion of that I'll push back on, because I think what you said is really smart. But to me, if Ole Miss is absolutely just, because I agree with you, they kicked the snot out of Georgia, right?
Yeah.
Ole Miss is number 9 this week?
Ole Miss is
right?
at 11.
Ole Miss is at 11. Oh, sorry, yes. Ole Miss is at 11. And Georgia's at 12. So part of this math ain't mathing to me. If you're telling me that Ole Miss, and I agree, Ole Miss just absolutely throttled Georgia and they show you how good they are, why are they only one spot ahead of them? Like, at some point, you either needed to push Georgia further down or you needed to move Ole Miss up. You cannot tell me that there is that big of a gap between those two teams that are back-to-back in the rankings.
That's fair. That's totally fair. It's almost like there's not enough room, and that's something that we've been preaching for a while now. I've heard so many fans say, well, of course a 9-3 such and such team is going to get into the playoff. You sure about that?
Yeah.
Are you sure about that? Because Georgia, which was the number 3 team in the country last week that only has 2 losses and has a massive win over Texas, will be on the outside looking in if the college football playoff was tomorrow. So no, I'm not convinced that a 3-loss team, a 9-3 team rather, a 3-loss team that didn't win its conference championship game is going to get into the college football playoff. A couple teams that I want to look at that I think could play spoiler, or on the other hand, could be the spoilee. One of those teams is Notre Dame. And I find it very fascinating where the College Football Playoff Committee ranked Notre Dame at number 8, but we would be the number 9 seed, which, if we're talking about unfairness in these rankings, that would stink because Notre Dame would have to go on the road rather than host a playoff game, which they would be if they were seeded 8, but at 9 would go on the road. But, I digress. It feels to me that the committee is placing Notre Dame kind of in this ranking purgatory to say, prove it to us. You got a prove it game coming up against Army in just a couple of weeks. You beat Army and you beat them handedly. You have your spot. You're sitting cush and cozy and things might move around you, but you have your spot reserved in the college football playoff. If you do not beat Army, and if you don't even do it convincingly even, there is plenty of space for Notre Dame to drop out and for SMU or Texas A&M or Kansas State or Colorado, some of these teams right on the outside looking in, to leapfrog Notre Dame. They're just kind of sitting in no man's land.
Some of those teams you just mentioned are key to this because, again, what have we seen? This is a reactionary committee. You take a big loss, you're going to suffer from it, right? So one thing we know is Notre Dame can't afford a loss anywhere. I will definitively say if Notre Dame loses another game, they're out of the college football playoff. What becomes interesting is what happens if they beat Army in an ugly game, because the committee also for the second straight week is telling you that Army's cute, but Army's not dangerous. Like, they're ranked number 24. For everything that happened that made you think there'd be movement, Army moves up 1. So Army goes to number 24. The committee's still telling you that's not a great football team. If Notre Dame goes into that game and struggles against Army, it's just that they eke out an ugly win, man, they're going to have to suddenly get really nervous because Colorado is not currently in this top 12, and Colorado certainly has a chance to catapult their way in depending on what they do, but Colorado controls their own destiny. So that's a team that's on the outside looking in. I already mentioned Texas A&M is on the outside looking in. Let's see what the committee decides to do with Georgia. Like, here's the thing, where they pocketed Georgia, Georgia's going to be the easiest team in the world to move right up to put in at the bottom of this playoff thing. Georgia's an easy team to sneak in. So if I'm Notre Dame, what I don't want to do is give the committee any mindset of, you know what? You're not as good as Georgia. And if you don't go out there and thoroughly whoop on Army, I think you leave that door open. There's nothing, depending on what everybody else does, I genuinely don't believe it's as simple for Notre Dame as win and you're in. I think Notre Dame's going to have to win the right way, and they're going to have to be very sure that everybody around them either takes care of the chaos or nobody out there creates more chaos with convincing victories of their own.
I still have to think an 11-1 Notre Dame team gets in. Even if it's an ugly, eke-it-out win over Army, that's still a top 25 win. I think it would be crazy if Notre Dame won that game and they did not get in the college football playoff. But to that point, there's a certain extent to which Notre Dame controls their own destiny. They control their own destiny to a certain extent. There's a lot of chaos going on around Notre Dame. I look at the SEC race right now. We have the potential for 7 2-loss conference teams in the SEC. 7. We have the potential for a wild tiebreaker in the SEC to see potentially Alabama and LSU in the in the SEC championship game. Talk about bid thieves. Talk about, the potential for a spot to be taken up by a team that we never thought would have been taken. I just still think an 11-1 Notre Dame team gets in, but the committee has set themselves up where if they want to drop a team 9 spots, they can.
Here's the thing, though. Like, look at the 3 teams right now below them: Miami, Alabama, Ole Miss. Okay, so Miami and SMU likely going to play for the ACC championship game, right? Like, the winner of that is going to get such a significant win, easy to put them ahead of Notre Dame. They'll get a big resume win. All right, so they move ahead. So that now there's only 2 teams behind them. You just mentioned a path for Alabama to rise their way up. Also, I've said several times, Texas A&M, by the time this thing's done, if they take care of business, they will rise their way up. So that's another slot for them to fall. And now you're sitting there saying, okay, Notre Dame versus Ole Miss and Georgia in this problem. And we don't know what's going to happen with Ole Miss over the course of the rest of this too. So Ole Miss is going to win their way out. So that's just from there. That's just from those individual spots. Now, the other side of it too is Boise State, who, I've given a lot of grief here, is ranked number 13. They're still going to have a Mountain West championship game against the UNLV team that's on the cusp of a top 25 win too. So I can't say, depending on what that game looks like, I can't say that Boise State win. So I can find teams all along in that 4 or 5 slot below Notre Dame that are nipping at the heels that have more runway to get significant wins. And if they're able to get more significant wins, it doesn't take a lot to leapfrog from 7 to 8. To get up from one spot to the next. It doesn't take a ton of room to get there. I think there's a real chance. It would take chaos all over the place, but I believe that could happen.
We've seen a whole lot of chaos this year. Like, let's not count out the possibility for just absolute chaos here from now until the end of the season, because I know it feels like we have everything figured out with just, 3 games remaining in the regular season schedule, which makes me a little bit sad, Fitz. I don't want it to be over. But plenty of opportunity for chaos, and it starts this upcoming week. It starts with Tennessee and Georgia.
Let me ask you this before we get to Tennessee, Georgia. We haven't mentioned BYU here, and BYU moves up a little bit. BYU likely, in my estimation at this point, I've said this for a couple of weeks, BYU is going to take on Colorado, right, for the Big 12 championship game.
Feels like it, yep.
Colorado is playing good football, right? Colorado, we gave a lot of credit last week. Let's say Colorado wins that game in a really close football game. Now, all of a sudden, you're Notre Dame, and you're sitting there like, well, Colorado's going to move in. They get a bid. Are we going to drop BYU? Is BYU going to drop all the way down below Notre Dame if they take one loss in a conference championship game, which Notre Dame chooses to not participate in? I don't know that.
No.
That's another team that leapfrogs.
So the conference championship games have so much potential for chaos, for bid thieves. Because if BYU wins out and loses in the Big 12 title game, well, BYU has a quality loss against Colorado, has beaten SMU, and has beaten Kansas State, 2 teams that the committee values. I do not see a team with only 1 loss in a conference title game against a team that is in the top 25 with a couple of quality wins, which is something, frankly, Fitz, that I can't say about every team in the top 5 even. Like, where's Texas's marquee win? They don't have one. The best resume builder that they have is a quality loss to Georgia. So I do not see a path as long as BYU takes care of business from now until the end of the regular season, not including the conference championship game. If they're 12-1, they're in. They deserve to be in. And I thought BYU got hosed last week by the College Football Playoff Committee, and they were getting no love and no acknowledgement for what they did. And they probably got boosted up a little bit because of Georgia and Miami falling, but I think that BYU deserves to be at 6 where they are.
Yeah, and these are the reasons that I think you got to be particularly nervous. Like, if you're just looking around, you got to be nervous if you're Notre Dame right now. Now, you were mentioned Georgia, Tennessee. That's another one that this creates a really interesting situation because, look, I think Tennessee can and should win this football game. I feel very strongly about that. But as you have pointed out when we were starting the show, Nico Iamaleava might not be available for this game. And so that leaves a door open for Georgia to get a win. And the interesting part of this, Carolina, is that I think people need to know the College Football Playoff Committee is told in writing for one of their considerations, they are told to consider star players that were not available for games. So if Nico doesn't play and they still win, they lose a close game to Georgia. Well, Georgia's going to get the tick of beating Tennessee. That's real. But Tennessee's not going to free fall because the committee, by rule, has to look at it and say, yeah, but they did it with their backup quarterback. Look at that. How different would the game have been if they'd had their starting quarterback? Like, that's a real conversation they're specifically told to have. So I see a real path if Georgia is able to beat Tennessee, where, again, that vaults them ahead of Notre Dame, and Notre Dame's sitting there saying, what in the hell just happened?
But then you have to get into the conversation of not even just looking at that game in a vacuum of how would it have gone differently had Tennessee had their starting quarterback. You also have to compare that with the rest of the field. Because let's say if I am, let me pull up the rankings, SMU, who sits at 14 today. If I get bumped out of the college football playoff because Tennessee takes one of those spots because the committee said that they would have played better had they had their starting quarterback, so we'll give them that benefit. Like, that doesn't sit right with me. Like, we can't play football in fantasy land. Florida State didn't get to the college football playoff last year because their quarterback was hurt, and the college football playoff committee told us that they're not the same team without their starting quarterback. They're not one of the best teams in the country without their starting quarterback. Now, we don't know right now what the official status of Nico Iamaleava is. I have heard from very good sources that he's in concussion protocol. He's day-to-day, and it is uncertain of if he'll play on Saturday or not. That's the tricky thing with concussions, is there is no timeline. If it was 2 weeks, banged up ankle, he'll be back for the end of the season for the SEC championship game. That's right. A much different story than he's day-to-day. We really don't know how he's going to feel tomorrow, much less on December 2nd or whatever day the SEC championship game is.
And to be clear, Nico would have to be cleared and ready and available for the college football playoff. The big difference with Florida State is they knew they weren't getting their quarterback back, right? So
he
it was
wouldn't
like
come back.
New evaluation. But yeah, Nico would have to be cleared back, and all things would have to be glorious. It's just, it opens up at least a can of confusion. Like a can of worms is like the can of confusion that can happen. And this is the stunning part. We have, 3 weeks left in the season? And I don't think we have a lot of clarity right now on anything. Like, as I was getting ready for the ranking show tonight, somebody said, who do you think number 3 is going to be? I sat there on the couch for a second. I said, Texas? You know,
Yes.
and I said it with that level of Texas. Texas 3, Penn State 4 makes sense. That's so jarring, because usually by now, with only a few weeks left in the season, it is so abundantly clear who the top 4 teams are. Right now, it's abundantly clear to me who the top team is. And everything else, I'm not even putting Ohio State. Let's see how Ohio State looks. I think Ohio State's going to beat Indiana, but it's certainly smarter people than me continue to push back to that that's going to happen. Let's see how that looks. Like, Ohio State needs to prove that they can beat Indiana. Indiana needs to prove that they can beat Ohio State. And there might be a path where either of them loses that game and they both still make it. Like, that's how weird this season has gotten.
Texas, I guess, because someone has to be at 3. Like, somebody asked me today, who would be your number 1 team in the SEC? And I said, Texas, I guess.
Okay,
because
so
they
if you were
haven't
on the
done
committee,
anything to mess it up.
But if you were on the committee today and you were asked a different question, who is the best team today? Right now, the best team. You got to pick one. Who's the best team in the SEC?
Texas.
Right. I don't feel good about that answer, but it's the right answer.
It's the right answer, but I don't like it.
The fatal flaws right now for Tennessee and the quarterback injury issue is real. The fatal flaws for Georgia are bigger. The fatal flaws for A&M are bigger. When Alabama plays like Alabama's supposed to play, it's Alabama. But then
they don't always play like Alabama.
You don't know. So, like, there are, as much as SEC fans are sitting here screaming, oh my God, we deserve 5 teams in the college football playoff. Do you? I mean, like, are there really 5 teams that you really look? I realize there's question marks everywhere, but like, who is the best team in the SEC? If you put, I say this all the time with pizza. If you put 13 people in a room and say, pick the best, like, we're now going to grade the pizzas from this local city, you're never going to get an agreement. It's a reminder of how hard the committee's job is. If you put 13 passionate SEC fans in today and you said power rank the SEC, you'd come out 5 hours later with a bunch of drunk idiots that are fighting each other. Nobody knows at this point who's actually elite in the SEC.
You don't even have to rank teams. If you just put 13 different fan bases from the SEC in a room, you're going to have a whole bunch of drunk people fighting anyways. And you got ranking football teams thrown in it. Like, call 911 immediately.
Could Ole Miss actually be the best team in the SEC?
So here's my thing with Ole Miss. Yes, I think that they could. There is a very strong argument because where is the glaring weakness on that team? The run game struggles. The run game is not the strongest in the SEC by a long shot. Everything else, they have an experienced quarterback that they trust. They have an incredibly deep wide receiving core that can survive a hit to its best player, its best receiver in Trey Harris, and still go out and beat Georgia. They have one of the best defensive fronts, not even just in the conference, but I think in all of college football. What Lane Kiffin did in the transfer portal, beefing up that defensive front, I think is very impressive. So there's so few glaring weaknesses, yet they still lost to Kentucky. Yet they still lost to LSU even when they didn't trail for a single second. Yet Lane Kiffin is still a coach that has been there now for 5 years and only has one big-time marquee win that came last week. So there's still some hesitation from me. And teams are allowed to get better. And I think Ole Miss has gotten better week over week, and you should get credit for that. There's still a little bit of something about Ole Miss that I don't entirely trust. But if Ole Miss and Texas played on a neutral field today, I'm probably going to take Ole Miss.
I'd take Ole Miss. And look, as they pointed out on the broadcast today, it's an important nugget here. Ole Miss is third in the country for least time trailing in football games. Number 1 and 2, respectively, are Indiana and Army, both undefeated football teams. I know they have 2 losses. We all know they have 2 losses. And 2 times it went really wrong. But in this modern environment where you're not out with 2 losses, if you're not shut out with 2 losses, and you do the test we do all the time on this show on a neutral field right now, who would you take? On a neutral field, I might take Ole Miss over everybody. Like, I'm amending my answer from earlier. I think Ole Miss might be the best team in the SEC right now. And the problem is, I just don't know if that version of Lane Kiffin that we just saw can be the version. But if you trust Lane Kiffin in a big game, Lane Kiffin and Jaxson Dart to be on the same page, if you can trust what we saw last week, man, the best of Ole Miss will beat the best of any team we've seen in the SEC this year.
I also think the best of Georgia could beat anybody in the SEC. I think the best of Texas could beat anybody in the SEC.
I don't know Georgia.
Problem is,
I don't think the best of Carson Beck is good this year.
But the best of Georgia's defense
that's
can
fair.
win them any game. I mean, to see what they did to Texas's offense, that explosive offense with one of the best offensive play callers in the sport, like the best of Carson Beck, I still think is good. Good job. Good job, Carson. The best of Georgia's defense is, I'm terrified. Like, I did nightmare fuel. So, and I think there's a fair argument to be made in the Big Ten as well. If Ohio State and Oregon play 10 times, probably pretty 50-50.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting exercise. We'll continue on this show, I'm sure, because I'd love to get Brenneman's thoughts on this when he comes back. But it speaks to what is made this year. As much as I've spent the first, 40 minutes of this podcast bitching about the college football playoff system, let's acknowledge that the fact that we're sitting here saying, well, I think this is the best team in the Big 12. I think this is the best team in the ACC. I don't know. The fact that I really believe right now the team in first place is not going to win 3 of the 4 conferences. I don't know that the team in first place is today, with 3 weeks left in the season, is a surefire thing in any conference except for the Big Ten, where I do believe that Oregon will win that conference. Other than that, I don't know. And that speaks to what has made this year absolutely beautiful. Like, for anyone that's complained, and for guys like me that are complaining about the way it's ranked, at some point you do just take a step back and say, hey, for all the complaints, sports never been stronger. Sports never been better. Sports never been more interesting. College football has never thrived more than it is thriving right now, tonight, on a Tuesday night.
Parity's good for the sport.
Hell yeah.
As uncomfortable as it might feel for a lot of Alabama fans or Georgia fans or Ohio State fans out there that are used to being, consistent contenders and consistently in the top 3, no doubt about it, hands down, these are the best teams in the country. It is so fun to be a fan of this sport right now.
You just talked me into something. I think maybe the best thing for college football happening still to this day is the College Football Playoff Committee. Because if we just had regular standings like the NFL had, and wildcard teams were going to go where wildcard teams go, then tomorrow the lead on every show, on every network, would not be some conversation about college football. It wouldn't even matter. right?
Mhm.
But the fact that the College Football Playoff Committee has this say, and the fact that there is a way that Georgia suddenly gets left out because the committee's rankings don't match the seedings, all the things that I've spent this much time complaining about, that's the very conflict that will drive conversation for the next several days and media outlets that wouldn't even talk about college football, because this is the most interesting thing that could possibly happen for the sport. So as much as we all want simple, I do have to remind myself and everybody else, simple doesn't create chaos, and chaos creates eyeballs and conversation, and that helps the growth of any sport.
Everybody thinks they want simple
Nah,
until you have simple, and then it's really boring.
that's why people always date crazy, Caroline. Always comes back to dating. You always date somebody that's crazy.
And you know what? And I hope that you live happily ever after. And I hope that every day you're looking behind your shoulder and you wake
Fixing
up every
crazy.
morning and have no idea what the hell your day is going to look like. But you know what? Variety is the zest of life. And that is definitely what we've gotten from the College Football Playoff Committee. We could talk about these rankings, I think probably for no fewer than 18,000 hours, but we do need to hit a break. Heisman contenders and pretenders coming up next. Not just the college football playoff rankings to watch, but the Heisman race as well. And I think it's kind of consensus, whether it's Vegas or it's just general watching of football. Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, Dylan Gabriel, Ashton Genty. If the invitations to New York City went out today, those would be the four representatives at the Heisman ceremony. Agree or disagree?
No, I agree with that totally. It's those guys have really separated themselves and all deserve recognition from what they're doing, for what they're doing, and each of them presents sort of something different to make their case, which I think is a beautiful thing this year too.
If you had to pick one today,
Look,
who is your Heisman Trophy winner?
I'm on record repeatedly saying that it'd be Travis Hunter because he's played so well on both sides of the ball. And I just think that that's such a special thing that we'll remember forever about this college football season. It doesn't mean that Ashton Genty hasn't been absolutely incredible, as Cam Ward has been Superman. If I was making my ballot, frankly, I would probably go 1, Travis, 2, Cam, 3, Ashton, 4, Dylan. And that's just normalizing the greatness of the way Dylan Gabriel has played this way. I understand that, but what we've seen has been particularly historic from Travis and Ashton. So I think those two stand out.
I have a mental dilemma, and I have a mental back and forth, a mental, ping pong of who I think is more deserving of the Heisman Trophy. Is it Travis Hunter or is it Cam Ward? And I understand Cam Ward is coming off of a loss. I get that. I understand that. I think if you've watched any of Miami this season, you would understand that that was kind of written in the stars. Like, that was going to eventually happen, that Miami was playing so close to the fire that eventually they were going to get burned. There was nothing that Cam Ward did in that game that made me think he was undeserving of the highest honor in all of college football. He has carried Miami up until this point, and I believe he's going to carry Miami into the college football playoff. 1 loss, 2 loss, whatever it might be. No player is more important to their football team than Cam Ward is to the Miami Hurricanes. And I think that should matter. I think that that is part of what the Heisman Trophy is. You're the most important player. You're the most valuable player. You're an impact player. But all of that being said, there's a part of me that whenever I'm making this case for Cam Ward that makes me think, are you crazy, woman? This award that goes to quarterbacks every single year, and you have a guy that's doing something unprecedented? You have Travis Hunter, who played 155 snaps against Texas Tech this past week. I mean, that's otherworldly. That's unfathomable. There is a guy playing both ways and playing at the height of the sport in both positions. Like, I want Travis Hunter on my team as a wide receiver, period. I want Travis Hunter on my team as a corner, period. But the fact that Colorado gets both, it's an embarrassment of riches. So I go back and forth here because I love an opportunity to give the Heisman Trophy to a player that doesn't play the quarterback position. And that is not any sort of hate or shade to the quarterback position.
Want something different.
I want something different. Variety's the spice of life. That's the theme of the day.
The hardest thing for me, when I talk to even NFL people, they'll tell you that teams aren't sure right now whether Travis should be a corner or a wide receiver in the NFL. Like, He's that good. He can play on Sundays at either position. And that's just, to me, that's so historic. It just feels to do it with this level of dominance on both sides of the ball is so historic. Like when people say we haven't seen a running back accomplish the things Ashton Genty has done since Barry Sanders. Okay, I agree with that. When people say I haven't seen a quarterback do things like Cam Ward has done since insert whatever quarterback you love the most here. Okay, I'll buy that. When you say I haven't seen anybody do what Travis Hunter is doing since, there's no name. Like there have been players that have played both ways, but not players that have been this incredible on both sides of the ball and have played this percentage of their team's overall snaps. It is truly historic. So for me, if some freak of nature can come in and do things that literally there are no records for, if I can't give the Heisman to that, then what exactly does it take to get the Heisman? Like that's utter dominance when you're doing something history has literally never seen.
And to be fair, to your point of we haven't seen any quarterback do what Cam Ward is doing since last year.
Right.
Like Jaden Daniels did it, and I can argue that Jaden Daniels did it better.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to belittle what Cam is doing, but you're right. Like,
of course not.
There's a flavor of the year every year at ice cream. It's like, my God, we've never seen quarterbacks do this. And it's always we've never. And it's like, well, yeah, we have. I mean, this is just what happens. And Cam's delightful. Like, I've really come around on Cam and Shador both, and where they're playing the game right now is the way they're playing the game right now is it's fun to watch. It's just not, oh my God, I have to watch this because I may never see this again. Like I'm going to see another Cam Ward next year. I'm not going to see another Ashton Genty next year. And I'm definitely not going to see another Travis Hunter probably in my lifetime. So like, those things have weight for me.
It's so fair. For our sake, I hope we have another Travis Hunter in our lifetime.
Yeah.
I don't see it happening. Like what he's doing is special. And I don't want to hear from the people out there, the grouchy old farts that hate Colorado and Travis Hunter and everything that they're about, diminishing what Travis Hunter is doing and what he has accomplished just because you don't like the head coach's attitude. I don't want to hear it. Save it. Travis Hunter is special. And the Heisman Trophy is reserved for a special player.
The only thing I'd ask Caroline is, could we reserve the Heisman Trophy for, I don't know, January? Give it out the weekend of the national championship game. Because my big take on this is like, look at Ashton Genty, for example. Mm-hmm. There are going to be people that say, well, he hasn't done it against anybody. And apparently they're not smart enough to figure out how to go watch the Oregon game on YouTube. But whatever. Like, so they missed that. There's an opportunity in the college football playoff, should Boise State make it, for Ashton Genty to truly dominate the best of the best week in and week out. And what if somebody, what if we give Travis Hunter the Heisman Trophy this year because it's absolutely unheard of. And then Jaxson Dart gets into the college football playoff and throws for 600 yards a game 4 times and suddenly Ole Miss wins the national championship. Like, we're going to feel stupid about giving the Heisman to somebody for what they did in the regular season without acknowledging in the modern college football environment, these extra games will have extra meaning and it will change the entire legacy of the way somebody looks for a season. Like it or not. I'm not saying you should be eliminated from the Heisman if you don't play well, but you have to give some sort of allowance here for a player to come out and really shine through the high stress of a college football playoff, show who they are, and then tell me who the most important player in college football was this year. They should give it out the night before the national championship game in a very special ceremony that truly honors it, honors the sport, honors the player, and honors what they've accomplished to get that far.
Totally fair. However, I believe that your record should not disqualify you from winning the Heisman Trophy. Obviously, we're not going to go crazy. If you're 1-11, you probably aren't the best player in college football. I don't think that a quarterback of a 9-3 or an 8-4 team should be disqualified. It was the same conversation we had last year with Jaden Daniels. It was the same conversations that we were having with RG3 when he won the Heisman Trophy, when Baylor was 9-3, when Lamar Jackson's team, his Louisville team, was 9-3 in 2016. Like, those are 3 of the most electric quarterbacks that we have seen in college football over the last 10 years. Those teams would not have been and were not in the college football playoff. To where if the Heisman Trophy is the night before the national championship game, we're all humans. We all are guilty of recency bias. Every year, the Heisman Trophy would just go to the quarterback on a team that is picked to win the national championship game. And I don't think that that's necessarily fair. Even if a Robert Griffin III was the best quarterback in the regular season, well, so-and-so XYZ quarterback, had a huge game in the college football playoff semifinal. You get credit for that, but I don't believe in disqualifying players because they don't get to the postseason or because they don't have a perfect sterling 12-0 record.
I agree with that. And my pledge to you is, if I'm ever allowed to be a Heisman voter, I would use the full body of work. Full body of work. Okay, Heisman, call me.
Promise me that today, and then we're good.
I promise you. We can both become Heisman voters. And then once we're both Heisman voters, we'll go to all other Heisman voters and we'll plead our case. We will change the Heisman from within.
Should we be the Heisman voters? The only ones, just the two of us?
Yes, I'm fine with that.
I think so too. Sorry, Adam.
Well, we can let Adam. Actually, Adam can be a third vote in case there's a tie. We'll let. Nope. Adam took the night off. He missed out. He doesn't get to be the Heisman voter. Emmy, our producer extraordinaire, she gets to step in. She is the third Heisman voter. She's the tiebreaker.
Emmy gets the vote. Congratulations, Emmy. Welcome to
Does that mean
the
somebody
Heisman
gets
Trust.
an Emmy? Is that it's probably the first time that joke's ever been made where you get an Emmy?
I don't know for certain, but I have a feeling that she's rolling her eyes behind her camera.
You know how many times I've heard? You know how many times I've heard shoe fits? All right, like if the shoe fits or pitching a fits. All right, there's certain puns are allowed.
Easy.
Right?
It's good. I think I made that joke earlier this week in our podcast on Saturday. What did I say? We were talking about your future child's name. If your kid was fat, you could name him Never. Just never fits.
Never fits.
Or nothing fits.
Yeah. At which point I did remind you when I was bullied in school that Jason Fats was one of the names. Yeah, one of the good names.
Slow hanging.
I was a fat kid though. I was a fat kid. I deserved it.
Well, I appreciate the creativity and the accuracy. Yeah. I mean, hey, it's not bullying if it's true.
Yeah, we're gonna give Emmy an Emmy. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, she deserves one. I think that the Emmys deserve Emmy. Because I think that our Emmy is better than the Emmys. And I mean that.
I'm sure she's tired of us talking about this, but if she has a friend named Emmy, are they the Emmys when they're okay, go ahead. Now I'm done.
Okay, enough. Okay. We're talking about the Heisman Trophy contenders. Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, Dylan Gabriel, Ashton Genty. Those are the top four. Obviously, everything changes in this sport at the drop of a hat. Anything can happen at any point, and all of a sudden, our entire view of the season is completely warped. Rapid fire, contender, or pretender. Players that are playing their way into the conversation or possibly even playing their way out of the conversation. Contender or pretender for the Heisman Trophy, Jalen Milroe.
Oh, contender. Still has plenty left in front of him. 1,000% contender, especially depending on what happens over the next few weeks with the SEC. I'm not taking anything away from Alabama yet. Definitely a contender.
I'm 100% a contender. The way he played against LSU almost made me question, was he a little bit banged up in the midpoint of the season when he just didn't look right? It made me give credit to Kalen DeBoer and their offensive coordinator, Nick Sheridan, for acknowledging this is the strength of our football team, is our quarterback's legs. We're not going to win football games by throwing the football 35, 40, 42 times a game like we did with Michael Penix Jr. So when you let Jalen Milroe loose, kid's dangerous. Contender or pretender? Jaxson Dart.
I'm going to go contender. I think this Ole Miss thing's going to get so much momentum over the course of the next few weeks. Yeah, I just, the only thing that he might be a pretender because I'm not sure there's a room for that big landmark moment that will make everybody say, oh my God, here's your Heisman, that will really propel him over the top. But yeah, I think he's a contender for an invite to New York. He's a
contender light to me.
Oh, I like that, yeah.
Because his opportunity was this past week. And look, Jaxson Dart had a solid game. He threw the interception early, but was able to come back. But Ole Miss won that game because of their defense. And Ole Miss has been consistently winning games because their defense is so freaking good. And that's nothing to take away from Jaxson Dart. But I don't always step away from Ole Miss games saying, man, that Jaxson Dart, Ole Miss just cannot lose because of their quarterback. I say that about Jalen Milroe in Alabama. I say that about Cam Ward in Miami. Talked about Travis Hunter, how if the Heisman Trophy ceremony was today, you would lean Travis Hunter. I still think I lean Cam Ward just a little bit, but it's such a strong argument for Travis Hunter. What about Shedeur Sanders?
Pretender. Because in order for him to accomplish what Colorado would need him to accomplish, that's going to go through Travis Hunter. So, like, this is one of those, they sort of separate each other. I think Shedeur has proven to be a much better quarterback this year than I've given him credit for at times. I think his growth, passing on time and on rhythm has been really good. But no, he's a pretender at this point for the Heisman.
I struggle with this one because you could also make the same argument. Well, Travis Hunter isn't doing half the things that he's doing if it wasn't for Shedeur Sanders. And
they're going to cannibalize each other. Like they'll cannibalize each other.
And am I wrong in saying that Shedeur Sanders has publicly said, don't vote for me for the Heisman Trophy, vote for Travis Hunter. We don't want to split the votes. I want somebody on this team. I want my teammate to get acknowledged. And I don't want, the votes to go to me to diverge away from him, which credit to Shedeur Sanders. That's a very, teammate thing to do. I think if the circumstances were different, Shedeur Sanders would absolutely be a Heisman Trophy candidate. If we just blind resumed and looked at Shedeur Sanders' numbers, we would say, yes, that is a guy that should be in the Heisman Trophy conversation. But once you add the label to it, obviously the Heisman Trophy it's a vote. It's a vote. People vote on it, and people have their own personal biases. If there's going to be a player from that Colorado team that gets the Heisman Trophy, it will be Travis Hunter. And that kind of stinks that there's a player that's deserving of it, but it makes sense.
I agree 1,000% with everything you just said. Just brilliant.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Fitz. I do feel like I'm pretty brilliant sometimes. You too. Everybody's smart. Everybody's brilliant. Binge stream sicko coming up next. Binge stream sicko for week 12. Binge is obvious, Fitz. It's Tennessee, Georgia.
Yeah.
That's the game. That is the game in all of college football. I'll ask you a question quickly. If Tennessee loses this game, let's say Nico Iamaleava is healthy, Dylan Sampson, the running back who's also been a little bit banged up, let's say he's healthy. They both go. If Tennessee loses this game, is a 10-2 Tennessee team getting into the college football playoff?
By the skin of their chins, I think it's going to depend on what happens. That becomes really complicated for a team like Alabama too, right? Like, so I think they make it, but it will push somebody from the SEC out, like for sure.
Yeah.
And it will push Georgia back up. Like Georgia will then suddenly come back up to what, 6-7?
Yeah.
So Georgia comes back up. I think that
would solidify Georgia in the college football playoff discussion.
But you can't put Georgia in and not put Ole Miss in. So Ole Miss is going to go in. Yeah. Georgia's going to go in. Texas is going to go in. Alabama's going to go in.
I think Ole Miss is in.
I mean, and Texas A&M is still going to have a very real shot at winning their way in, which then becomes an extra complicated. Yeah, it gets like if you are just a random SEC fan, Georgia winning in this is going to make it really complicated for everybody else.
If Georgia wins this game, you'll have a 2-loss Georgia team, 2-loss SEC Georgia team, a 2-loss Tennessee team, a 2-loss Alabama team, a 2-loss Ole Miss team. If Texas A&M if Texas A&M beats Texas, you'll have a 2-loss Texas A&M team, a 2-loss Texas team, a 2-loss Missouri team. If Missouri wins out, they have a tough matchup against South Carolina this week, but if they win out, they're 10-2. And then you'll have an LSU team that only has 2 SEC losses. So that's 8 teams that have 2 losses in the conference.
I don't know how the committee separates it. Like, so as an agent of chaos, I kind of love this, but I think Tennessee's going to win this football game, by the way, and I think that's going to propel Tennessee into this top 4 conversation.
Spicy.
Yeah.
You know the last time Kirby Smart lost 2 games in a row?
No.
2016. His very first year at Georgia.
Wow.
But weird things happen in college football in our year of the Lord 2024. What are you streaming, Fitz?
Utah, Colorado is a big stream one for me because Colorado needs this win. Obviously, they control their own destiny. And Utah just came off of not a controversial loss, yes, but that's the sort of loss that just sort of rips your soul out, right? So Utah's got to find a way to really rebound here. And as I said last week on our show, one of the things that really impresses me is how measured and calculated in business like Colorado is right now. I think they take care of business, but man, this game is so wildly important for Colorado. It's particularly interesting to me.
this is everything to Colorado. And this is a Colorado team that's averaging 33 points a game. This is one of the best defenses in the country. A Utah team that's averaging 17 points a game. So this is unstoppable force versus immovable object. Like, the winner of this Colorado offense versus Utah defense matchup, like, that is where this game is won and lost. Colorado wins this game and Colorado wins out. Well, now all of a sudden we have a really interesting Big 12 race where we could potentially see two Big 12 teams in the college football playoff. Am I a sicko if I'm streaming Nebraska at USC?
Yes. Yeah. Why would you stream Nebraska
fair.
USC? Why?
Well, I don't know why, honestly. I think it's like we've just seen too many battles of heavyweights and really good football that I want to just maybe just indulge in something disgusting. It's like, you've been eating clean and what sounds really good is like a greasy cheeseburger. And I know it's going to be bad for me and I'm going to feel bad afterwards, but I'm still going through the drive-thru.
Yeah, I want that.
That's Nebraska USC.
I wish I felt. Look, I thought maybe you were going to go like Boston College, SMU. Let's see what that like. That feels a little
That's
sicko.
pretty gross too.
But no, like Nebraska USC is that like I don't care what we're actually seeing right now. I care about brands in college football, and these two brands, damn it, will entertain me. They will give me what I want, which is entertainment. If Lincoln loses this for either coach, Matt Rule or Lincoln Riley, a loss in this game is just another kick in the no-no places to a season that is just going to sit in the craw of grossness for their fan base for the rest of time.
It feels like Lincoln Riley needs it more, though.
Oh, yeah.
Like Matt Rule, in my opinion, from the outside looking in, has built up enough equity with that Nebraska fan base that they can feel like, okay, we have something tangible to hold on to moving forward. We have Dylan Raiola. We really like the culture that's been built up, and Matt Rule's had a pretty massive undertaking in his first couple of seasons. We have optimism for the future. USC fans are just pissed off. Like, what are we paying you $100 million for? No, what would buy you a mansion in the hills for? You were supposed to come here and be the truth. You were supposed to come here and win us national championship games. You hadn't done that, Lincoln.
I think I want
overcooking your brisket.
I think I want this. I think I want Nebraska to just go out there and thump USC just to see how Lincoln handles it.
See, there's more fun in this than
you've talked me into it. Pop the popcorn. See? Let's go.
Pop the popcorn, go through the drive-thru, get your nice, greasy, disgusting little cheeseburger, and enjoy it.
Can I have a coffee cake muffin at the end of that?
Of course.
Okay, perfect.
I'm going to wrap some up. They're in the mail on their way to you. I'll overnight them. You'll have them for breakfast in the morning. Okay. That is going to do it for us today. Adam, we missed it. We promise. As much trash that we talk on you, we love you and we miss you. We'll be back on Saturday night with a full reaction to the Week 12 action. You can follow Fitz on Twitter at Jason Fitz. I'm at Caroline Fenton 1. Like the pod, subscribe to it, review it, do all of that great stuff. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell a Colorado fan, tell a fan that he's going to the Nebraska USC game. I hope you have the best time ever. We'll be back on Saturday night, and we are out.